Hello, I am Jordan. I am going to do yet another tag today. This was created by Tom over at Tom LA Books, who was kind enough to tag me. And it is the Fab Four book tag, created in honor of the fantastic new documentary, Peter Jackson documentary, about the notorious kind of abortive get back recording sessions that the Beatles did in, I believe, 1969 or 68. And I'm kind of slowly working my way through that, and I've been thoroughly enjoying it. I find it wonderful. Um, I mean, as everyone knows, there are two kinds of people in the world. There are those of us who love the Beatles and those of us who pretend not to. And thankfully, I am very firmly in the first category. So it's been great watching that. And this is a wonderful way to commemorate that. It's a fantastic tag. There's some great thought-provoking prompts here. So I'll quit nattering on and just go ahead and get started here. The first prompt is a book that you dreamed about or that inspired one of your dreams. um, Dreaming about books is something that doesn't happen to me very often, honestly. It does happen occasionally, but the first time I remember it happening was with a book, starting to feel like a broken record here. It was with Little Big by John Crowley, which had a almost hallucinogenic effect on my life as I was reading it. It truly made me observe the world in a very different way through the lens of the atmosphere of this book. And I did dream about it on more than one occasion. And I think I've dreamt about it since. He's just that kind of writer, and it's just that kind of book. I'm not going to go into another tirade on how this is so underappreciated, but if you're interested, go ahead and check it out. Anything by Crowley, at least all of the ones that I've read, are well worth reading. Two is a book that talks about drugs, or that was written under the influence of drugs. And for this, I'm going to go with a book that I don't love, and that's Infinite Jest by David Foster Wallace. I've talked about this book briefly on my channel before and how I think it is overall not a great book. I think it's about 500 pages too long, probably. But where it really shines is when it talks about addiction and depression and things related to that in a way that I read this book 10 years ago, or more than 10 years ago now. And despite the fact that I didn't really like it, I never keep books I don't like. I kept this one because there are moments in this book that I think about all the time that literally haunt me. And it's moments that deal largely with addiction or mental illness or things like that, because that's where I feel like the heart of this book is. And I think it's a shame that Foster Wallace felt the need to kind of pad it with a bunch of Pinchonian conceit. But there are moments in this book that are definitely worth experiencing, in my opinion. And it is a very, very druggy book, and not in a glorifying kind of way, which is refreshing. Three is a book about someone who had far more success than what they expected, or a book that was much more successful than what the author expected. For this, I'm going to go with The Confederacy of Dunces by John Kennedy Toole, which unfortunately I don't have a copy of, which is a book that famously was not published in the author's lifetime. It was published after his death and went on to become wildly successful. I believe it won the Pulitzer Prize. And it's a very, very good book. It's hilarious. And certainly, I think it's fair to say that it was more successful than John Kennedy Toole could ever have known. Four is a surreal book, or a book with some surreal elements that you enjoyed. I love surrealism. I think, especially in like my early 20s, it had a massive impact on me. But I still think the greatest surrealist book I've ever read, with the exception possibly of The Master and Margarita, is this, Le Chant de Mardereau, something like that, by Lautréamont. And this is not a particularly well-known book, as I understand it, but it is incredible. It's not like fun, playful surrealism by any means. It's very dark, very grotesque, subversive, but not in a way that feels subversive for its own sake, which I can't stand. It's really about the strange imagery that Lautréamont was able to conjure here. Again, this book is full of images that I think about frequently. I really want to get back to rereading this at some point. It's been a long time since I read it. Next is a book you loved that A, has a minimalist cover, or B, is written in a minimalist style. This was a difficult prompt for me because kind of come to realize that I don't care for minimalism in literature generally, which is interesting because I love it in like visual arts. But as far as books and prose, minimalism doesn't do much for me. I think it took me years to kind of admit to myself that I don't care for Hemingway really, largely because of that. But I was able to find a couple books that have minimalist covers that I really like. And they're both vintage classics. The first one is The Waves by Virginia Woolf, which just has this, I think it's bed sheets and a windowsill there in the background. I think that's lovely. I have not yet read this. I'll be getting to that soon, though. And the other one is Picnic at Hanging Rock, which just has the young woman laying in the sunlight, which I think is very nice. So yeah, if anyone knows if Vintage Classics always does such wonderful covers, let me know. I'll start looking for them more. 6 is a book of poetry that you found uplifting. I don't really read straight through books of poetry. I generally get like the collected poems of a writer I really like, or I get anthologies of various poets. But a book of poetry that I go to frequently in order to feel kind of uplifted or inspired is the Poetry of Yates. This is just a great book to kind of to fall into the very, very lush, atmospheric language that Yates conjures up, and the kind of mysticism that he toys with. I find very engaging and wonderful. I'm not nearly smart enough to really parse exactly what is at the heart of these poems, I think, but I feel like the atmosphere is enough to put me in a certain frame of mind, which I really enjoy. 7 is an experimental book that's very uncommon for its content or format, and yet it works well. Again, this prompt got me thinking, and it made me kind of realize something about myself, which is that generally speaking, I don't care for experimental literature, but there are some exceptions for sure. What I'm going to say is The Book of the New Sun by Gene Wolfe, which is actually 4 books. This is the first 2 here, which is a very, very weird and wonderful book. I think it's experimental because it works on so many different levels. It's from just the simple sci-fi storytelling all the way up to some kind of metafictional, tongue-in-cheek irony. It's a book I will never fully understand for sure, but it's also just a great story, and it reminds me a lot of Borges actually, and how it kind of folds in on itself in a very, very engaging way. I do think I need to read these again, but I do think that these books have a very, very problematic attitude towards women, which I remember finding very cringy when I was reading it. But maybe that's necessary in a way that I hadn't realized when I first read it. So I will be getting back to these. But if you haven't read The Book of the New Sun, I certainly recommend the books. They're quite good, quite interesting. 8 is a book about a woman, or if you can't think of one, a man who was unjustly blamed or accused of something. I'm going to go with just the very obvious answer on this one, and that's the Scarlet Letter. Oh Lord, what is her name? Hester Prynne, I think. Yeah, Hester. I'm almost certain is her first name. And the Scarlet Letter is, I think, it's unjustly kind of written off as just an American classic, what have you, whatever. It's a lot, at least for me, it was a lot more than what I expected. It was the first Hawthorne book I read, and since I have read a lot of Hawthorne, and he has become one of my favorite writers. He's just got such perfect, just crystal clear, beautiful prose, and there's a strange, romantic, almost surreal, gothic atmosphere to his novels, including The Scarlet Letter, which I find very, very intriguing and unique. So I'm going to go with The Scarlet Letter. And 9 is a book that opened your mind and made you think of the universe in a new way, either physically or spiritually. Back in early college, I read A Brief History of Time by Stephen Hawking, which had that effect physically, I think, although I didn't retain much of the information from that book. So I'm going to go with a book I have been reading on and off for about 15 years, and that's In the Buddha's Words, which is just an anthology of sutras from the Pali Canon. Buddhism and Buddhist thought is something that I grapple with on a daily basis, and this book has been a fantastic guide. And then more recently, I read, just this month actually, the Bhagavad Gita, which was illuminating in a very similar way, but also fascinating in the way it contrasts with what I know of Buddhism. So both of those books, I think, have expanded my mind on a spiritual level. And finally, 10 is a book that you found very powerful and moving despite its apparent simplicity. And I'm going to go with The Member of the Wedding by Carson McCullers, who is a fantastic writer. I highly recommend McCullers. The Heart is a Lonely Hunter, for sure, but my favorite of the books I've read from her is certainly The Member of the Wedding, which is a very, very simple story about a young girl whose brother is getting married and the way she handles that. And it's just a beautiful book. I've read it multiple times, and each time I find it just incredibly moving. I think what McCullers is unbelievably good at is empathy. The way that she writes about characters without judgment at all is truly astonishing. I think people ascribe a lot of empathy to like Tolstoy or George Eliot, which is true, but I always get the sense that they are doing violence to their characters in order to create a more cohesive or some kind of statement in their work. McCullers has no statement. Her statement is simply the characters, and it's beautifully done. I don't really care for realism, but when McCullers does it, it's truly awe-inspiring, I think. So The Member of the Wedding. And that is the Fab Four book tag. I went on for quite a while there. Sorry about that. I struggled a little bit to think of someone to tag here because Tom tagged a whole lot of people. I'm going to go ahead and tag Kelly of books I'm not reading. Kelly, if you're watching this and you feel like doing it, go ahead. And anyone else who is watching this who I did not tag, consider yourself tagged. It's a fantastic tag. It's great thought-provoking prompts. As always, you can always expect that from Tom. And yeah, thank you for watching. Have a good day.